Hi, Jeanette.
Okay.
There's so many things I want to talk to you about today. But before we get into your background and your training, I feel like we really, have to address the elephant in the room, which is that you're supposed to be in space right now.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about the mission that you were supposed to be on?
Well, I was supposed to launch on this past June 6th to do about a 6-month mission, and around December I was removed from flight after completing all the backup flow in Baikonur and in Star City and completing all of that. So
this was supposed to be your first flight, right? You were selected as an astronaut in 2009. You've been training for a long time. You've been waiting to go to space, and this was going to be the first flight?
Yeah, so I joined the Astronaut Corps in August 2009 and went through 2 years of astronaut candidacy. And we all graduated on November 2011. And so we went through all of that training, and then I've been training ever since. And so as far as being assigned, you have to be certified in all areas, the spacewalk training, robotics, Russian language. And so by the time you're assigned, especially after waiting 8 years or 7 years, you're pretty much ready when it comes to the Houston training. So, and then once you're assigned, you have to go over and you have to go over to Russia. I did language immersion and then went over to Star City to start training. And then you also go to Germany, to Cologne in particular, and Japan, and you have to do all the training there as well.
So it was in January, right, that you got pulled from the mission?
That's
Okay.
when the public announcement came out.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about what you know about why you were taken off?
Well, I can't speculate in this forum why that was done, but it was a decision of my management, and it's something that we're going to try to continue to work through. I'm back in the Corps now. I'm working on the NASA Orion program, which is it's really the space launch system, which is a mission to go back to the moon, to build a lunar orbital platform called the Gateway, and to basically get astronauts back to the moon and develop technologies there that would help take us back to Mars. I'm still flying the T-38. I'm still Capcomming in mission control. And so I'm just back at the office doing the same things that I was doing for the 8 years that I was waiting for a mission.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So has something like this happened before where a crew member is taken off a mission and no real reason is given for it?
Well, people have been removed before, but not in the same fashion that this was done, partly because I was so close to launch, and I completed the entire backup flow. We passed all of the exams in Star City, and then Baikonur really was what you get to do after you pass all your exams in Star City. I passed everything in Cologne for the specialist. I was a specialist, trained to the specialist level for the Columbus module on the space station. And I did the same thing in Japan, in Tsukuba, where you train to the specialist level for their module on the ISS, which is the GEM module. So with all the training that I had done and completed in Houston, Russia, Germany, Japan, everything was completed. And so to be removed while you're in Russia and different things like that, it hadn't been done. Other people had been removed because of a medical thing, an accident. One person broke a hip and had to be removed from flight, of course. But I didn't have any medical conditions or anything like that. So, and I don't have any family issues at all either. So.
Right. So do you know when you might get an answer about what happened? Is there any kind of internal investigation going on?
Well, I don't know when I'll get an answer, and hopefully it'll come soon. Like I'm hoping by the end of the summer, because I think that what's happening soon is that we're going to run out of Soyuz seats because we are building a commercial crew vehicles through Elon Musk, through SpaceX, and through Boeing. And so those ships are to take astronauts to space. We have a SpaceX Dragon that takes logistics up to space, but the next follow-on, he's going to take our people to space. And so with that happening, we won't need the Soyuz anymore. And so we'll have fewer and fewer seats on the Soyuz. So I'm not sure if in the future, if I am assigned a mission, it'll be on a Soyuz, even though all the training for Russia has been completed, and I mean, it was phenomenal training.
Right. Wow. Okay. So, do you even know who made the decision? I mean, is it possible that it could have been a political decision, or do you even know if it was NASA or possibly the Russian partners?
And that is so I seriously do not believe it was the Russians, our Russian colleagues, partly because I've been through the training with them, and I think I was able to develop really good working relationships with everyone there. And you know, a testament to that was that I think some of the people there may have known that NASA was thinking of doing this, but they were adamant that I had to complete all of the training, even down to out in Baikonur doing the leak check for the suit that was made for me and the seat liner that was made for me. So they wanted to check everything and check it inside the Soyuz so that they know that if and when I fly, that my suit fit was good and the seat liner that they made for me was a good fit. And so that I'd be comfortable in the right seat in the Soyuz. So the Russians, and you know, there were even several Russians that defended me for, you know, in the sense that it's not safe to remove someone from a crew that has trained together for 2 years, or for a year at least, and went through all the final exams and things like that. So for safety reasons, I think some people, especially the Russians, were a little concerned. And so besides that, I don't know where the decision came from and how it was made, and in detail at what level.
Right. I think a lot of people were really excited for your mission. I mean, in part because you were going to be the first African-American crew member to actually live on the space station, and it's almost 20-year history of having astronauts continuously living there, orbiting Earth.
Yeah.
And because there hasn't been any reason given, I mean, a lot of people have been left wondering if this was ultimately like a racist or a sexist decision. Is that something you're wondering too?
Well, I mean, it's not that I mean, it's something that I live with every day, and I don't live with it thinking about it every day. Because to me, I think, as with anyone who is a professional, you know, the goal is to get the job done and to do well and do as well as your colleagues, and make sure you're a contributing member to whatever team you're in, and make sure you're doing your part. And you know, if things do happen, you can participate and make sure that you can get things back on track as a crew, as a teammate, as you know, a person living on the station. No matter what happens, you're part of the team, and you want to really just go through and make sure everything's done. And so, to me, and within that framework, there's no time to really be concerned about you know, sexism and racism and things like that, because we have to perform. And if it comes into play, then you're hindering the mission and you're hindering the performance. And so whether or not it's a factor, I can't specifically or speculate what people are thinking and what they're doing in this form. Unless I have a little bit more information, I don't want to speculate on what people are thinking, especially in this forum, because to me it's a little, it takes away from the mission and things that we're trying to do. And if that is the reason that things like this have happened, to me, it's even worse. And so, I mean, you could see all the work that we've done, and it never seemed to play a role, like in Russia during the water survival training and things like that. And so I kind of ignore a lot of stuff, and I don't speculate. You know, so I don't know what to say to that at this point. It is. You know, it's always something that I think, well, it's something that a lot of people have asked me, and I haven't commented yet. And so I'm waiting to see what comes of all of this.
So what's it been like for you getting back to work after all this? 'Cause you're back in Houston now, you're doing some of the jobs that you were doing before.
Yeah. And so getting back to work is, it's like business as usual. And so getting back in the T-38, doing the same things that we have requirements of so many hours that you have to fly per quarter. Getting back into working in mission control as the Capcom. Trying to make sure that getting back in the pool for the neutral buoyancy lab and working in on spacewalk training. And really, that is the primary thing. And then apart from that, you have a regular job. And my regular job is to work within the exploration branch where the Orion is being developed. And so, and that's basically it. I do know getting back was interesting because I'm working with my trainers. A lot of them were really concerned, and they thought that something may have happened to me, and because we never saw this coming. And so it's been actually an interesting experience, and to see the response and the impact that this whole thing has had on other people. And of course, I'm impacted, but to know that other people are impacted too is kind of it was a pleasant surprise, even despite everything that's happened. I didn't know that people felt that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I imagine that that's kind of a frustrating experience to go through something like this and then still not to have a lot of answers. And I was thinking about how, it must be a little bit isolating just in general to be an astronaut because you're part of such a small club. And as an astronaut who's also a woman of color, you're part of an even smaller club. So when you're going through something like this, where there's not a lot of people who can understand your experience, I mean, how do you take care of yourself? Who do you have to lean on for support or things like that?
Well, that's part of the surprise that I had in coming back. There were a lot of people who were really supportive, former astronauts and things like that, who reached out and were really helpful and just talking to me and trying to figure out a way forward and what happened. And so in a situation like that, the pleasant thing was some of the people that I never expected to come through and to really have my back in a lot of crazy situations that have happened. So I didn't have to do this alone, in other words. And so it kind of was very, I was very happy that you kind of, I found out that I had more friends than I thought. And I think going through something like that is kind of, you kind of realize and you recognize who your real friends are in a time like that. And it's important to know that because it is interesting and different and difficult to go through. And so having people like that really help.
Well, before we get too deep into your life as an astronaut right now, I want to back up because I think a lot of people in the audience are probably really interested in hearing about your background and how you got to where you are today. So can you tell us when you first got the idea in your head that you might want to be an astronaut one day?
Well, it's interesting because the idea of even becoming a scientist, it all started when I was about 9 years old. And I have a twin sister, and she and I, we had come home from school one day and we had our report cards, and we wanted to show our brother because he had just come home from college, and he looked at our report cards and goes, "Wow, you guys did really well. You can become astronauts or maybe even an aerospace engineer. They've got these women who are now astronauts." So this was at the time when Sally Ride and a bunch of other women had finally been selected for the astronaut corps in the U.S. And so, when he said that to me, in my mind, I thought, well, there's no way that they'll pick me to be an astronaut, but I can definitely become an aerospace engineer. And so that one little thought that he put in my brain, I don't even remember if I was already 9. It was the year that I was to turn 9, and it stuck with me ever since then. And so the whole path of going through physics and then realizing that I really want to get back into aerospace and going to graduate school for it, that whole idea came 9 years, at the age of 9 years old or so.
So what was it about aerospace engineering then that made you stick with it all the way through graduate school?
And so it's interesting because I don't know if it's that one seed but that he planted or if it's, so I really am a scientist. I really love anything to do with anything technical and getting involved. And for me, aerospace was much more practical than physics. You can actually build things, you can see it fly, you can make it work, in other words. And there's so many things. There's aircraft, helicopters, missiles, just even looking at the aerodynamics of a car. And so there's just something to me in my brain that I'm attracted to in being able to learn things like that. And so it's been a lifelong journey, I think, for my sister and me as far as being involved in anything related to science and technology.
So after you finished your degrees, how did you decide what to do next? You went to Ford for 2 years,
I
right?
did. And so my advisor he was probably thinking that he was pretty upset with me because I worked in helicopters and these different materials to reduce vibrations in helicopters. And I posted my resume at a conference one year, and Ford Motor Company picked it up, one person there in the research lab, and gave me a call. And I thought long and hard about, I've worked 7 years in aerospace, can I do the same thing for cars? And, is it that I want to stick with aerospace, or, do I want to apply to the astronaut corps? Do I want to do things? I still had in my mind that they'll never select me, even though I had a friend, Leland Melvin, who was selected. And I said, they'll never select me, so I'm going to do the things that I really want to do and participate in. And so I went to work for Ford Motor Company. And Ford was very good to me, and I had about 2.5 very good years there. And I was able to do some work that I was proud of. And one of the things we did was try to reduce vibrations into the vehicle by mounting these actuators on the suspension control arm. And it seems like it's a technology that worked because I've seen it deployed in recent years, this past 2 years, on trucks to reduce vibrations into the truck. So Ford was very good to me, and I was able to continue doing some of the things that I was doing in graduate school at Ford Motor Company. And so it was a seamless transition. Yeah.
So after Ford, then you went to the CIA for 7 years. What can you tell us about what you did there and what your experience was like?
Well, I was a scientist that worked there, and so working on non-proliferation and arms controls issues with respect to aerospace was one of the big things that I was able to participate in. And as a technical operations officer, you look at the different technologies that are out there and how they can be used for information gathering and different things like that. But really, as an aerospace engineer, the big thing is you're sort of a reverse engineer and looking at different technologies. And then also with the export control side, you're looking at, what technologies are we selling other countries when we sell our technologies? So really, that was a part of it. But one of the things that I do, I can't tell people is that you can volunteer for a lot of different things. And one of the things I did do was volunteer to go work in Iraq. And so I do think that experiences like that kind of gave me the confidence that I can be a very, very technical person, but also have an operational side to it. And I think that's what an astronaut does. They're very technical, but in the real sense, everything that we end up doing is taking that technical knowledge and being an operational person with it. Even to the point of, getting to the space station, understanding the ship that you're in, that's very technical side. But then you're on orbit, you are the scientists, the hands and the eyes of the scientists on the ground as well, and performing all of their experiments. And then each person individually is an experiment in and of themselves as well. So I think that my experiences at the CIA and at Ford Motor Company kind of fed into what I eventually found out was what an astronaut does. You're very, very technical, but you're also very operational at the same time.
And so while you were at the CIA, then that was when you first applied to be an astronaut, right?
Yeah.
What made you actually fill out the application?
Well, it's a weird thing because, like I said, I had a friend who had applied to the astronaut corps years earlier and got in. And he was a friend of mine at the University of Maryland, and he gave me a call in 2008 and said, hey, they're accepting applications for the astronaut corps again. You should think about applying. And I thought, well, I am getting older, and I may not have another chance to apply. And so I said, I'm going to go ahead and apply this time and see what happens. And when I got there and they started the interviews, and there were a lot of things that I didn't expect, and didn't know were going to happen. I figured, oh, I'm totally bombing everything. And I said, well, at least I'll gather enough information so that when I apply next time, I'll know exactly what to do. And I kept saying that, and then they called me back again, and I still said it. And then the next call was that, hey, I was selected. So it was quite a surprise, just from that phone call to the actual application process and getting selected.
There's obviously some pretty rigid physical and intellectual requirements for being an astronaut. But what other traits do you think that they're looking for? I mean, what sense did you get when you were applying? And
Well, having worked in teams and different things, someone who I think is flexible and adaptable to any environment and even to people. I mean, you may end up in a situation where you're living with people who you've trained with and different things, but they're not your best friends and things like that. And you have to be comfortable, flexible, and adaptable and still work together as a team because you still have a common goal, which is the mission. And one of the experiences that I had in Astronaut Corps was to do the underwater study that we talked about earlier, the NEMO mission. And so living underwater with 5 guys, it was, and not just 5 guys. Aki Hoshide was our commander. He's from Japan. Thomas Pesquet, he's from France. And then Mark Vandehei, colonel in the Army. Me, and then the 2 Habtaks. And so we were kind of a very different bunch of people living together under one roof, in one habitat, I should say. And so how do you, 9 days, it seems like a long time when some people say it, but it went by so fast. And it's partly because, a testament to working with those guys, we actually got all the work done that was in research that was laid out before us, but we also had a really good time doing it. And so if you're flexible and adaptable, it doesn't matter who you're with, you have a mission, an assignment, you can make every situation a very good one. And you can make it so that, wow, that went by really fast. We could have stayed another few weeks and, it would have been okay. It only lasted for 9 days and then you're done and you go back home. And so I definitely think that it's a testament to Aki and Toma and Mark and Hank and the other James that we lived with. It was such an easy situation, even though we were in an environment that was relatively dangerous. You couldn't just leave from the habitat and go back up to the surface. So it was quite interesting when you think about the traits that Toma and Aki and all the guys had. They were just very flexible and adaptable, and not much bothered them or got under their skin. And if they did have a problem, they could talk. We could actually talk to each other and say, hey, you did this, and it's done, it's over with, and you move forward. So I think, to me, after you have all the requirements and everything's done, and what I often tell young scientists, you can be the smartest person in the room, the fastest, the most athletic, but if you really can't get along with people, you really won't go that far. And so having the ability to do all your work and be competent at it and be able to physically fit and do all those things, but also to be a person who's flexible and adaptable to any situation is, I think, key. Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you more about that Aquarius reef base experience. I mean, I guess you have to be flexible to be working in an environment like that, but does the group dynamic change when you're in an isolated environment? I mean, is it really much different than when you're working together, in an office?
It does only slightly because, not even slightly, because when you think about it, working in an office, you basically work there 8 hours, 9 hours, or 10 hours a day, and then you go home. In the habitat environment, we were there 24 hours a day with each other. In fact, our bunks, I don't know if you remember, they were right across from each other. There were 6 bunk beds, 3 on each side, and they were right across from each other in this very small closet space. And all you had was your bed, and you had a little cubby hole for whatever personal items you had. And so because we're together constantly, it does change. And that's why it's interesting to see, to live with a group of guys that you work with all the time, and then all of a sudden you have to live with them for 24 hours a day. And having that experience and still coming out friends and having had a good time, I think it's a testament to the group and their flexibility and adaptability, understanding that we have a job to do, we get our tasks done, and we can still enjoy the time there because it's not going to be forever.
Mm-hmm. So besides doing some of these intense sort of simulation missions, you've also had to do a lot of training in Russia because NASA still, as you said, relies on the Russians to be taking its astronauts into space with its Soyuz capsules. What has that experience been like? I mean, is working there a lot different than working in the US and with NASA?
Well, apart from the language, it's different in the sense that, for example, we have to do winter survival and water survival there, which is not. It looks like it's really easy, but it's intense and it's ultimately doable, of course. The exams that we take, we go through the Russian systems, and every exam you take, it's like you're sitting in a seat, and you have a board of about 5 or 6 people, and 2 or 3 of them will ask questions, but really anyone can ask questions. And so to me, it feels like you kind of have to have a period of proving yourself, in a sense, and passing all of the exams. And those are the individual exams, and then beyond that, we as a crew, we have a whole set of exams that we have to go through on the Soyuz, and then in the modules mock-up that they have in Star City. And so the exams can be a little bit more, to me, intense, in the sense that it's like defending a dissertation every time. And I do think that's why the working relationship with the Russians is you kind of, I don't know if it's you gain respect for by doing your work and different things, but it does seem like over time that we had a really good working relationship. And Sergei was my 3rd commander, and before him was Anton Shkaplerov and Alexander Samokuteyev, and all 3 of them, I like to consider them friends. We end up having a very tight-knit. We work so closely together and doing all these things. So there was, to me, I think that we developed a really nice rapport working together in the end. And then going off to Baikonur and doing the press conferences and all those different things. We were stuck together so closely, like working in the underwater, that you end up becoming friends just because you're all there together. And so it worked out nicely, I think. And I definitely believe that some of the training in Russia, because it was my first time, was probably so intense. And there was a lot of training in the beginning in Houston that was intense as well. And I don't think Russia failed to deliver on that too. Yeah.
So when you're working on such international teams, has that changed the way you view your role as a scientist, or just the way you view your mission as an astronaut?
Well, I think they're the same. Your role as an astronaut and a scientist, even though I think as an astronaut you kind of have to be more operational. But working internationally, I think, for me, is more gratifying because you kind of, you're not just working within the US, but you're working, especially in Russia, you're working under different customs and traditions, and you really have to walk that path. And, if you understand that it's not your path, you have to figure out what is required of you and go down that path. In Russia, in Germany, in Japan, and all the different countries. And be flexible enough, if that makes sense. And it's very different from the US training and US education. And so I think understanding that, I think it helped me get through all of the different training in the different countries and requirements from different, very different, like US versus Russia, very different requirements. And even in graduate school, one of the nice things is that my advisor, he was from India. The people in my group, one guy was from South Africa. We had people from France, Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands. We had people from South Korea. And so having worked in an international sort of environment in graduate school, I definitely think that helped out a lot too. And so even though it doesn't seem like it should be that different, it can be. It can be very different, but understanding that is half the battle.
I'm curious about how politics might influence the work that you do at NASA. So you started out during the Obama years, and now we're obviously in a different era in the US. But do you notice big changes at NASA when it switches from one administration to another?
Well, so it's too early to kind of know that, but I do know that like when Obama came in, that we were shutting down the shuttle program in favor of the Constellation program, which was to go back to the moon. And so once the Constellation program was canceled, we suddenly got involved in more commercial crew issues and things like that. But here we are, it's 2018, and we still don't have a U.S. Vehicle yet to take our astronauts to the International Space Station. Hopefully by the end of this year and starting in 2019, we'll have a commercial crew vehicle that can take a number of us to the space station. Right now, we have a new administrator. He's been there for just under a month, and it's too early to tell how things would change. And but I'm holding out to see how things go. We just got a plus up in our budget this year, a slight plus up, and that helps. We are planning to go back to the moon and use the NASA Orion as the vehicle to get us there. And we're building this lunar orbital platform, the Gateway. So we're using everything now for the NASA Orion and this lunar orbital platform to go back to the moon, to develop technologies there, to practice things that will help astronauts live longer in space, and technologies that can get us further and deeper into space so that we can get back to Mars. And so hopefully everything that we do at the moon will be like an engineering platform, engineering test bed for all the technologies that we need to get astronauts and cosmonauts deeper and deeper into space. And hopefully that next step will be Mars.
What do you think right now are the biggest technical challenges to getting that Orion vehicle off the ground with people on it?
Well, I think monies was one of the challenges, and we got a plus up in the budget this year to do different things. And so technically, for all we went to the moon in the 60s with Apollo, and we didn't have nearly the technology back then that we do now. So the technologies to get us to the moon are there, and it's just a matter of building it and putting it together. And as far as going to Mars, we really still need to test out new propulsion systems, new materials that will help protect from radiation, figure out new countermeasures and different protocols for the human body to get the muscle mass and bone density and cell structure to be optimum, to get us out to Mars and bring us back home. So there's, for the moon, I think that we have the majority of the technologies available. It's a matter of putting them together and having the monies to do it, to get us out there. Getting us to Mars is another story.
What do you think are the hardest parts about figuring out that puzzle right now?
For Mars, probably the propulsion systems.
Okay.
But as a human being, I guess I should say also the radiation technologies that we need to protect human beings, and even some equipment can be impacted by different the atomic radiation. So there's several two components probably: the propulsion and materials.
And you mentioned that there's commercial crew vehicles being prepared as well. That's the SpaceX and the Boeing projects, right? And NASA's preparing some astronauts to actually staff those craft. How are you seeing things change within the agency as they're preparing to partner with SpaceX and Boeing on this project?
Well, we are, one of the big things is that by 2025, we are supposed to basically have the ISS more of a commercial ISS. And so I think that that whole mindset is changing the way we look at things. You know, the commercial crew vehicles really is going to start by taking the NASA astronauts to the space station. And then by 2025, are we going to start transitioning those vehicles to use it for commercial purposes? So with that said, the safety protocols and different things that we have in place are likely sufficient, but I think working out everything that we're going to do over the next 6 years or so with the astronauts that we have and how we're going to transition, it's really kind of new. And I think if I told you something today, it'll be different by the time in 3 months or so.
Yeah.
So preparing for commercial crew, really, I think we're gonna treat it as like shuttle launches. And we're gonna do that for about 6 years. But in the meantime, at the same time, we have to transition to a commercial ISS and no longer funded from the government aspect.
So what are your long-term hopes and expectations? They might be different for the future of space exploration, and maybe, let's say, in the next 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah, so I guess one of the big things for me is that I hope that we do establish the moon as an engineering testbed to get us deeper into space, but at the same time establish a presence at the moon where we can do great research that'll take us further on how to do things properly on Mars. I guess my biggest hope is that we do develop the right technologies to get us out to Mars, but also establish a platform on the moon. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to talk to you about, I mean, women and people of color are still pretty underrepresented, I think, in space exploration. And I think this is a question that we need to be asking of the white men field a lot more. But from your perspective, what are some things that the industry could do in general to promote more diversity or to be a bit more inclusive?
See, that's a tough question because I felt like I was one that was being included and involved. But I do think that there's still, we have a new young lady, Jessica Watkins, who came in this past summer, African-American young lady. And so it's hard to say what else can be done except that, well, you can hire a few more. And, you know, because once people are in, I mean, I think the requirements are that you perform and you do the tasks. And you have to perform as well as your colleagues. And, you know, it's kind of hard to be like the best in a group of people who are like trying to be the best. And so you at least have to fit in there somewhere and find what you're good at and stay in there. And so it's hard to say, NASA, this is what you need to do in order to get more. And other than say, well, you should select more. And, you know, there's a big group of people out there who are very capable and competent people who would make great astronauts. And so there's not an argument that, well, we can't find these people. I know many of these who I feel are way more competent and physically capable than I am and to do the job. And so those people are there, they're out there, they can do the job as well as I could have. And so it's not that they're not there. And if you want to be inclusive and you want to be more representative of what the United States looks like, then, you know, there is an opportunity to hire more.
Did you have any role models or then later mentors that were really important to you in this way?
Well, okay, so there's several people who I consider role models. I start with my mother. My mother, she passed away like 5 days after I was selected, but she was one of the toughest people, having raised 7 kids, a majority alone. And so she raised my twin sister and me, and I'm pretty much alone. And her whole motto was, you know, education, and, you know, just do your job, just do your job, just do your job and do it well, and never leave a place worse than when you found it. And so her mentality was really, I think, the driving force for my sister and me. And then beyond that, looking at the heroes in like Mae Jemison, having gone through, I think she went through a lot and has succeeded in doing a lot of phenomenal things. And it's not easy being the first anything. And so just having gone through that and finished that is very inspiring. But while I've been in the astronaut corps, the people that have really helped me and were mentors, like Clay Anderson, one of the former astronauts. Terry Virts really helped me quite a bit. Aki Hoshide, Greg Chamatoff. And it's interesting because the majority of the people that have really rallied around me and helped me were men. So that's why it's hard to say that NASA, you should do these things. And the only big thing, I can say at the end of the day is that you can hire more and select more. Right. So.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's hard to be the first anything, and when you were selected for the mission that you were supposed to be on now, you were meant to be the first African-American person to live there. Is that something that weighed on you when you were thinking about going? I mean,
it is, because I didn't think, my first comment was that, well, actually, I'm not the first. So actually, Mae Jemison, there's Stephanie Wilson and Joan Higginbotham. And so I'm not the first. And they're like, well, you're the first long duration. I said, okay. And so I never do things to be the first anything, because it's not easy being the first anything. And so, because it was promoted that way, you just kind of have to go with it and explain what it really means. So there's been several African Americans that have visited the space station via the shuttle, but no one has actually gone through all the training in Russia to be in the Soyuz, to fly the space station and live there for up to 6 months. So that's the big difference. But it's still, we're all doing the same job. We're kind of all doing the same task. And so being singled out for something is kind of, it does, it makes me a little uncomfortable, because I don't feel like I'm the first. I feel like I just want to do my job. Right. And I don't like, I don't like when people do things just to be the first anything, and I didn't want to be one of those people. You know what I mean? So at that point, you just kind of have to accept it because it was put out there. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I realized why it's important that they made that distinction is because I realized that there's a lot of young girls out there and women, especially in the States, who didn't know that I existed, didn't know that other African American women were doing these things. And it can be a platform for inspiring young women, inspiring other people to just, be who you are and go for it. And, if I'm doing this, why can't you do this? And so after a while, I had to take it on as a mantle that is required of me being in this position. And then, I had to accept it. And I do, and that's one of the reasons I came here, because I do think it's important to tell my story.
Well, I want to make sure we have some time for the questions that have been coming in. I think some of them are up on the screen here. Okay, the top one is, what does NASA have in the roadmap concerning interplanetary colonization? Is overpopulation of Earth something that is spoken about?
Well, overpopulation isn't necessarily an issue that we talk about. I do think that exploration, and because I think as human beings we have a desire to explore and find out and learn new things, I think that's one of the big things that I hear talked about. And also, when we look at the moon, we went there a handful of times, and so we really don't know a whole lot about the moon unless we have had probes that have gone to the moon and things like that. But really, once we set foot back on the moon, we can kind of look at the impact craters, figure out sort of what happened, what impacted the moon and caused it to become what it is now. How did it get stuck in our gravitational pull? So looking at how things happened here on Earth, what happened to the moon, and understanding that will help us likely prevent things from happening in the future. So those are the kind of things that we talk about doing geology, doing exploration and research. And colonization isn't necessarily one of the big plans of NASA.
Seems like a lot of people want to know about Wi-Fi on the ISS. So
Yes.
Is there Wi-Fi there?
There is. There's a wireless access point, and because we have access through the satellites. So we have several teacher satellites. We almost have continuous communication with the crew, especially during a spacewalk. We have nearly continuous comms with the crew. And so we have S-band and KU-band antennas on the space station, and we pretty much have internet now. And almost, we're close to having it continuous. So yeah, the Wi-Fi is pretty good, I hear, on the space station.
Okay, I'm going to pick the pop culture question that we have here. Which one do you like more, Interstellar or The Martian? Why? Have you seen both of those movies?
I have seen both of them. Interstellar was very freaky, and it was very good, though. But I do have to say that The Martian turned out to be one of my favorites, and it was because I didn't want to see it because everyone's talking about it, so it's kind of like a fad almost. And then when I finally did see it, it was completely impressive in how much thought Andy Weir put into every detail of the story that he wanted to tell. And so because of that, and then he did his homework. He came to NASA, he came to Johnson Space Center, and so he had a lot more realism to what he wrote and what he did. And so I was definitely attracted to The Martian a little bit more.
Okay, well, I think our time is up, but thank you so much, Jeanette.
No, it was my pleasure.